the unforgiving vastness of the frontier. Clara's boot slid sharply as she hurried through tangled brambles and sun-baked earth, her breath ragged beneath the relentless sky. Suddenly, a frantic cry pierced the stillness, a child's voice tangled in desperation. Turning swiftly, Clara's eyes locked onto a small figure, struggling helplessly, sinking deeper into a sinister patch of quicksand. It was Namid, the young son of the Apache chief, trapped and fading beneath the treacherous ground, his wide eyes anchored in fragile hope. Around them stretched the wild borderland, merciless and mute, a tawny expanse of scrub and thorn, where the wind whispered ancient warnings. The sun blazed high, casting jagged shadows over cracked stones and dry grass. Loneliness clung as tightly as the dust to Clara's skin. This was a land where salvation was rare and danger always lurked just beyond sight. Clara knelt at the edge of the mire, hands trembling despite her resolve. Years of solitude had hardened her, yet moments like this gnawed at the fragile threads of courage woven through her heart. Namid's dark hair was damp with sweat, his small frame tense and spattered with mud. His native wisdom flickered faintly in eyes ringing with fear of sinking, of abandonment, of an unknown fate. For Clara, the risk was immense. If she failed, both their lives might be lost, and yet backing away meant condemning him to death. A silent reckoning bubbled beneath her calm exterior. The choice was made without words. Clara gripped a weathered branch, tested its strength, and reached out, every muscle straining as the earth threatened to swallow them both. Namid's small hands grasped hers, trembling yet desperate, a fragile lifeline connecting two worlds torn by mistrust and history. The squelching mud clutched at their feet, as if nature itself conspired to keep fate's cruel distance. Namid's breath hitched, caught between hope and terror, while Clara's heart hammered a fierce rhythm, mixing dread and determination. The frontier's savage silence was punctuated only by their struggle. The rasp of straw against flesh, the creak of bending wood, the soft whisper of wind threading through the high grass. Each second stretched, heavy with possibility and dread. Suddenly, voices echoed from beyond the ridge, rough and unfamiliar. The sharp timbre of human speech sliced through the wilderness, stirring every nerve with uncertainty. Were they friend or foe? Allies or threats? Clara's grip tightened, anchoring Namid, while her eyes scanned the horizon, shadows lengthening as figures emerged, blending into the parched landscape's grim tapestry. Time suspended between life and peril. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso. Antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça, dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando, para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Clara's arms trembled as she pulled Namid free from the grip of the quicksand. His small body slumped against her, exhaustion evident in every ragged breath. They stood together, two fragile figures caught in the vast silence of the frontier, where help was scarce and danger lurked behind every wind-whistled shadow. Namid's skin was pale, his dark hair matted with grime and sweat. His eyes, once wide with panic, now flickered with cautious wariness as he leaned against Clara for support. She surveyed the rugged landscape around them, the uneven earth, the brambles scratching at their clothes, the sun descending behind distant hills. No signs of shelter, no signs of salvation beyond their small circle. "Are you hurt badly?" Clara asked, voice low and steady, though her own muscles ached from the rescue. Namid said nothing at first, his gaze shifting away, clouded with mistrust. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, fragile and ready to snap. Finally, he whispered, "Why did you save me? Why should I trust someone like you?" His words held the weight of centuries of conflict, a wall built from fear, resentment, and the scars of countless battles. Clara swallowed hard, sensing the chasm their histories had carved. "Because I don't believe in watching anyone drown," she replied. "Not anymore." Namid's eyes searched hers, flickers of doubt, clashing with a flicker of something softer. Curiosity, perhaps, or the briefest hint of gratitude. The land around them seemed to hold its breath. Without a word, Clara grabbed a small satchel from her worn pack and pushed it into his hands. Inside were dried berries and a bit of jerky. Nothing grand, but enough to sustain a boy weakened by fear and struggle. Namid hesitated, but hunger outweighed suspicion as he took the food with a trembling hand. They began moving, Clara supporting Namid's faltering steps as the terrain grew rocky and unforgiving. Every motion was a test of endurance. His small wince as he put weight on his leg did not go unnoticed. "Does your leg hurt?" Clara asked gently. "I," Namid admitted, his voice tight, "got caught in a trap days ago. It still aches." Clara's jaw clenched subtly. Every mile they traveled was a battle against time and elements, without rest, without aid. The wind rustled a chorus of dry leaves above them, and the lengthening shadows deepened their isolation. The silence between them filled with unspoken questions. Namid's posture was guarded, his trust barely budding. Clara's resolve was steadfast, but burdened with the knowledge that survival relied now on fragile unity. As they paused to catch their breath near a gnarled mesquite tree, Clara scanned the horizon with sharp eyes. The frontier was vast, but never empty. Danger was never far behind. Namid caught her gaze, tension flickering in his dark eyes. "Do you fear them?" he asked quietly. "Who?" Clara replied. "Sentries. Men. Looking for me." Namid's words hung heavy. Clara recognized the undercurrent of fear, the ever-present threat stalking the son of a chief. She nodded slowly, emotions knotting inside her. "Then we must keep moving and stay hidden." The day slipped away swiftly, leaving a bruised sky painted in dusky reds and purples. The once gentle breeze had turned colder, carrying the scent of dry earth and pine needles. The forest thinly cloaked the land, but Clara's senses sharpened sharper still. Suddenly, movement stirred among the trees, subtle, deliberate shadows pressing close. Clara crouched, pulling Namid behind a low brush, just as swift silhouettes slipped between trunks. The undergrowth crackled with faint rustles. Namid's breath caught. Their eyes met. Both knew the imminent peril, but could only wait in fragile silence. Clara's hand hovered near the knife at her belt, muscles taut. None of the shapes spoke, but the weight of their presence pressed like a stone against Clara's chest. Her mind raced with possibilities. Were these hunters, scouts, enemies sent by the rival factions she had heard whispered about? The border skirmishes that fed on blood and suspicion? Namid tightened his grip on her shirt. The years of lore and warning from his people reflected in his steadfast glare. Even with pain and distrust, he refused to be a silent victim. The last rays of sun vanished, swallowed by the gathering night. Shadows shifted again, edging closer, whispers of danger coalescing in the cold air. Clara held him firm and whispered fiercely, "Stay ready. Whatever comes, we face it together." The forest seemed to close in, the encroaching dark, a living thing with glinting eyes. Between the towering trunks and the rustling leaves, figures emerged, silhouettes sharp and patient, moving with the precision of those who stalk their prey. The first branch snapped with an ominous crack. Namid's whispered breath trembled. Clara's voice was steel, cold and clear. "A trap is set. We must run. Now." Their bodies moved as one, hearts pounding like war drums, disappearing into the tangled maze of the woodlands as the unseen threat pressed in, fast, unrelenting. The embers of twilight vanished behind them, swallowed by the cold night, and the hunted had become the quarry. The ghostly echoes of footsteps followed close. Behind, an ambush was unfolding. The forest pressed close, shadows weaving through twisted trunks as Clara and Namid ran on, breath ragged in the cold night air. Behind them, the soft crunch of footsteps lingered, a relentless pursuit. Namid's steps faltered. The pain in his leg throbbed with each agonizing stride. Clara slowed, turning sharply to support him, her eyes scanning the thick darkness for any sign of their hunters. "We can't keep this pace," Namid whispered, face pale and etched with exhaustion. "They'll catch us if we don't find cover soon." Clara's pulse hammered in her ears, but her voice remained steady. "Just a little further. I know some hollows nearby where we might lose them." Namid nodded, wincing as he tried to put weight on his injured leg. Gratitude flickered beneath his wary gaze, the walls of suspicion between them growing thinner with every shared step. The borderland was ruthless, trust even more so. The dense underbrush soon gave way to a shallow ravine, cloaked in fog and silence. Clara led Namid into its gloom, pressing him behind a fallen tree trunk that lay half-submerged in moss and leaf litter. From here, they could watch the thicket without being seen. Breathing shallow, Clara gripped the knife strapped to her belt, eyes narrowing every time a twig snapped or dry leaf rustled. The hunters moved carefully, experienced predators driven by greed or grudges, their minds set on capturing the chief's son like a prize. The stakes had never been higher. Namid's gaze, shadowed yet resolute, met Clara's. "Why do they hate me so?" he asked quietly. Because of who I am, or who they fear I might become? Clara's lips pressed into a tight line, her thoughts flashing to the whispered stories of rival tribes, backstabbing clans, and bounty hunters who thrived on chaos. Maybe both, she said. But right now, we've got each other. That counts for something. A delicate silence bloomed between them, broken only by distant calls of night birds and the occasional stir of wind. Yet the dangers were far from over. Minutes stretched thin before a rustle from the east stirred them again. Clara's senses sharpened. She saw a figure stepping lightly between them. Trees. A young woman garbed in earth-toned leather, movements graceful yet purposeful. A warrior, unmistakably. Tayani. Namid stiffened, eyes wary, but flickering with hope. Clara's breath hitched. The stories whispered on the wind had finally woven flesh and bone before her. Tayani, a fierce protector of the Apache, had tracked Namid down. Yet her expression was unreadable, a guarded storm behind deep eyes. We don't have time for hesitation. Tayani's voice cut the night, a measured blend of caution and urgency. I followed your trail, but there is more at stake than your safety. Clara stepped forward slowly, keeping her hands visible, voice firm. We're running from the same hunters. If we don't trust each other, we all die. Tayani's gaze flicked to Namid, then back. To Clara. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then she nodded sharply. Fine, but know this. Our tribe faces a threat greater than outsiders. A rival leader hungers for Namid's place. His men hunt not just to capture, but to destroy. Namid's tightening jaw betrayed the weight of that revelation. He swallowed hard, pain and fear mingling in his eyes. A traitor within our own. Clara's mind raced, weighing alliances forged in fire against the walls they'd yet to breach. Survival demanded unity, but treachery bred shadows darker than the forest's night. How many? Clara asked quietly, stepping closer to Tayani. Too many, Tayani said, and they have spies everywhere. We'll need to move swiftly if we hope to reach the tribe before the enemy does. Namid's limp worsened as he tried to stand straighter, but Tayani supported him with strength born of experience. The moment was fragile, a blend of hope, distrust, and urgent necessity. We'll travel together, Clara said, her voice low but resolute. You know this land better than I do. Lead us. A tentative truce settled among them as they stepped cautiously from the ravine's shadow. The fragile alliance, sealed in whispered promises, beneath a trembling silver moon. Yet even as they moved deeper into the wilds, Clara's instincts bristled with unease. The danger was not just beyond the trees, but woven into the heart of the tribe itself. The rivalry threatened to tear everything apart, an enemy unseen yet deadly. Their path was uncertain and fraught with peril, but together they knew the stakes. Namid's life, the future of his people, and Clara's unyielding courage bound them in a fragile dance of survival. Ahead, the forest breathed secrets and shadows, and Tayani's words echoed sharply. A leader within sought power through grasping his own brother's bloodied crown. As they disappeared deeper into the wilderness, the quiet night held its breath. The hunt was far from over. The sky darkened as storm clouds gathered above the ragged trio, Clara, Namid, and Tayani, forcing them to seek whatever shelter the merciless land might offer. Thunder rumbled low, a distant growl that soon crescendoed into a violent roar, scattering brittle leaves and whipping dry grass into wild tangles. They ducked beneath a cluster of sagebrush, its spindly branches providing scant protection from the torrential downpour that followed. The rain struck with a relentless fury, blurring the horizon and pounding the earth into slick mud wherever it could reach. Clara's soaked garments clung to her frame like heavy canvas, but the chill in her bones came less from cold and more from the urgency that every moment held. Namid sat slumped against a rugged boulder, wincing as the sting of a hidden wound met the sharp bite of rain. Tayani crouched beside him, her hands deft and sure, as she examined his leg again, moist hair plastering her young face as she worked in the dim light. The weight of responsibility pressed on her slender shoulders. Namid's survival was no longer only a mission, but a sacred trust. Clara shivered, lips pulled tight, watching the flash of lightning briefly illuminate a landscape turned alien in the storm's grasp. "The rain's not kind," she murmured, voice low. "This ground will swallow us if we don't find higher ground soon." Tayani's gaze flicked between Clara and Namid. "We must keep moving before the next bolt strikes. It's the only way." Namid's breath hissed through grit teeth, but he nodded. "I will try," he said quietly, voice rough but determined. The pain in his leg throbbed relentlessly, yet his spirit flared with the same fierce flame that marked his lineage. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within, the struggle between weakness and the seed of strength. The trio fought the elements as much as their own fatigues, trudging forward through swelling puddles and loamy mud, each step a battle against the weight of exhaustion. Twilight was crushed beneath the storm's oppressive curtain, the forest around them seeming to close in, the wind moaning through skeletal branches like a sorrowful dirge. When night finally swallowed the last embers of light, they found refuge inside a narrow cave mouth, hidden behind a veil of tangled vines and jagged rocks. Inside, the trembling of bodies was not solely due to cold, but the growing weight of unspoken fears. As Clara tended to the minor wounds and rubbed warmth back into numb fingers, Tayani's voice broke the silence. "You know," she said softly, "the stories of my people, the Apache, are etched not just in the land, but in blood and honor. Namid carries the weight of those stories more than any of us." Namid lifted his chin, eyes dark pools reflecting flickering firelight from a small blaze Clara coaxed to life. "Leadership in my tribe is not simply about strength in battle," he said, voice thick with meaning. "It is about balance. The land, the people, the spirits, each must be honored and protected." Tayani nodded, lips pressed thin. "My father, the old war chief, taught me that a leader must be a shield and a sword, but also a heart. Namid's path is dangerous, not only from foes who seek power, but from the burden itself." Clara listened, a quiet ache settling deep in her chest. The tribal lore, the battles they faced, resonated beyond cultural divide. Here, beneath rock shelter and storm-shielded sky, the fragile threads of understanding wove tighter. The boy she saved was more than a child. He was a symbol, a promise fragile as the rain dripping from jagged stone. She looked at Namid, who, despite the pain, showed a tentative spark of trust toward her and Tayani. Perhaps, she thought, the chasm carved by years of conflict could begin to bridge. Yet the night bore harsh tidings. Through the cave's narrow mouth, Clara's keen eyes caught a faint flicker, not the fire's warmth within, but shadows moving with silent intent beyond the veil of trees. Figures well hidden but watching. Not the soft rustle of forest life or the passing trail of predators, but deliberate, coordinated. She stiffened, muscles taut, whispering sharply, "They're here, spies, watching us." Namid's gaze sharpened, reflecting hard years of waiting, running, surviving. They know where we are. Tayani's jaw clenched, fury and fear entwined. The rival faction sends their eyes far and wide. We are trapped, not just by the storm or the wilderness, but by those who hunger for Namid's blood. Clara pulled her cloak tighter, the firelight casting grim shadows on her face. The storm's roar faded into background noise. The real tempest was human, waiting, watching, breathless with silent malice. "We can't stay," Clara whispered. "We must move before dawn." Namid nodded, wincing as Tayani helped him to his feet. The pain was a harsh drumbeat, but the spirit inside did not falter. Together, weary and resolute, they melted into the black embrace of the forest once more, shadows within shadows. Beyond the trees, the watchers melted back into the dark, unseen but unblinking. The hunt was far from over. The forest pressed in tighter, a living maze of shadows and whispers, as Clara, Namid, and Tayani found themselves encircled by the rival faction's hunters. Their breaths fogged in the cool air, mingling with the scent of damp earth and crushed pine needles. Clara's arm throbbed where a jagged rock had torn her skin during their last desperate escape. A slow burn beneath the layers of grime and rainwater. She grit her teeth against the pain, knowing any sign of weakness could be fatal. Namid moved closer, his dark eyes fierce despite the limp that betrayed his earlier injury. For the first time since their flight began, it was Namid who took the lead in vigilance, his youthful face rigid with responsibility, as he scanned every flicker of movement beyond their fragile hiding spot. The tables had turned. Clara sensed it with a quiet pride tinged by the terror of their vulnerability. "Tayani, how close are they?" Clara whispered, her voice barely more than stale breath. "Too close." Tayani's voice was low but sharp, her fingers curling tightly around the haft of her knife. "They know this land, too, well. Wolves who hunt like shadows. It's no ordinary pursuit. They want us to make a mistake." Namid swallowed hard and glanced at Clara. "It's more than a fight for survival," he said, voice rough with pain and determination. "It's about old blood, ancient grudges, and a prophecy stirring the hearts of those who would rather see my tribe crumble than rise." Clara's eyes narrowed, tracing the distant outline of trees, shaking under weightless moonlight. A fragile silence settled, heavy with unspoken truths, before Namid spoke again. "The rivalry isn't just about power. It's about who is worthy to lead, the son of a chief or the usurper willing to spill his own people's blood for a crown. She breathed in the bitter night, the raw edge of the frontier, pressing against her skin like a knife. The legend they carried wasn't just folklore. It was the pulse that set the stakes for every step they took and every choice they made. The tremor in Namid's voice echoed ancient fears, yet beneath it flickered hope born of reluctant courage. Suddenly, Tayani stiffened, her eyes slicing through the dense underbrush. "They've captured one of our messengers. He carried word of our route, a secret path we planned to use back to the camp." Clara's heart sank, the weight of that news sinking cold into her bones. The fragile trust they'd painstakingly built now stood on a knife's edge. Their sanctuary was compromised. Namid's fists clenched in silent fury. They'll block the way. "If we're caught, those dark hearts will spill more than blood. They'll erase any hope for my people." A rustle, too deliberate to be the restless forest, stirred nearby. The faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps closing in. Clara's breath hitched as her survival instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. "We need a plan," Clara said, voice steady despite the pounding storm in her chest. "Use what knowledge you have, Tayani. Guide us through traps, hidden paths, anything that can make them lose track." Tayani gave a subtle nod, her jaw set with grim resolve. The land speaks in signs, even when men hide behind greed and malice. If we listen carefully, we might slip through. Namid shifted his weight painfully, each movement a reminder of the fragile thread weaved around their lives and the tribe's future. "I must protect you now," he said quietly to Clara, a statement heavy with unspoken promise. The son of a leader, stepping beyond childhood's shadow to shoulder the burden of guardianship. Clara looked at him, at the fierce determination etched in the lines of his face shadowed by moonlight. Despite his pain and uncertainty, she saw a spark, a leader beginning to claim his legacy not by birthright alone, but by acts of courage and heart. The forest around them seemed to pulse with anticipation, the trees standing mute witness to the struggle that transcended the physical. This was more than a chase. It was destiny intertwining with the blood-soaked soil beneath their feet. Suddenly, distant voices sliced through the night, harsh, urgent, and too close. The rival faction's hunters had discovered the breach. A cold dread twisted in Clara's gut, every nerve fired with alarm. Tayani hissed, "They're moving faster than we thought. We won't get a second chance." Namid leaned heavily on Tayani as she helped steady his weakened frame. "Then we run, through the secret pass, without hesitation." Clara glanced toward the narrow trail Tayani promised, shrouded in sickly mist and concealed behind thorny oaks. The path was treacherous, scarred by natural traps and steep ravines, but held the only hope to outpace their relentless pursuers. A sudden snap of a twig echoed sharply nearby, breaking the fragile silence like a judge's gavel. The hunters had closed in on their position. "Move!" Clara's command shattered the tension, a battle cry born of desperation and fierce will. Together, the trio surged into the shadows, limbs burning and hearts pounding. The night swallowed their flight, as twisted roots threatened to catch their steps. But the secret path was their salvation. Dark, unforgiving, and unpredictable. Behind them, the snarls and shouts of the enemy grew louder, hungry for blood and victory. Ahead, uncertainty loomed thick as the mists, and in the heart of the wilderness, the chase became a test not just of endurance, but of loyalty, courage, and the fragile bonds forged in the fires of danger. The forest seemed to close in around them, the dense foliage heavy with moisture from the relentless storms that had passed. Every step Clara took was measured, each footfall tentative across tangled roots and hidden crevices. Her arm throbbed fiercely, where the jagged rock had ripped her skin during their last desperate flight, a dull burn that pulsed with each movement. But pain was a luxury they could not afford to entertain now. Naaman's breath came in sharp bursts, ragged and shallow, betraying his weakness despite his fierce determination. His injured leg barely bore his weight, forcing him into a limping gait that slowed their progress. Yet, for the first time since their ordeal began, it was he who took the initiative, eyes piercing the shadows, alert and unyielding as he scanned their surroundings. "Tayani," Clara whispered, her voice barely breaking the thick silence. "How close are they?" Tayani's dark eyes flashed with tension, her fingers tightening instinctively around the haft of her knife. "Too close," she replied, voice low and steady. "These hunters, weapons forged in darkness, know every hidden path, every secret of these woods. They hunt like silent wolves, waiting for a single misstep." Her gaze darted to the dim trees, sending chills down Clara's spine. Namid swallowed hard and met Clara's eyes. Pain and resolve warred in his expression. "This is no mere chase for survival. It's blood and betrayal, ancient grudges stirred by a prophecy. The kind that sets brother against brother." His voice cracked, revealing the weight that shadowed his youth. Clara's breath caught at the depth of his words. This was more than a contest of bodies. This was a clash of legacies and destiny. "The rivalry," Namid continued, voice a fierce whisper beneath the canopy, "is not just about power. It's about who deserves to wear the chief's mantle. The rightful son or the usurper, willing to bathe his own kin's hands in blood." A suffocating silence followed, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves trembling in the night breeze. The forest held its breath with them, as if it too dreaded the truth. Suddenly, Tayani stiffened, muscles coiling with alertness. Her eyes sliced through the darkness, locking on a shadow concealed among the ancient oaks. "They've caught one of our messengers," she hissed, voice tight with controlled fury. "A spy. He carried word of our secret path, the route we hoped to use to slip back unnoticed." Clara's heart plummeted as icy dread spread through her limbs. The fragile web of trust and hope they'd spun now strained under the weight of betrayal. Namid's hands clenched into fists, rage simmering beneath his skin. "They will block our way," he growled. "If we fall into their trap, the blood they spill will drown all hope for our people." The soft crunch of footsteps in the underbrush shattered the fragile calm. The hunters closing in, like shadows stalking prey. Clara's instincts flared, a fierce, primal alertness sharpening her every sense. "We need a plan," she said, voice taut but steady. "Tayani, your knowledge of this land is our only advantage. Lead us through traps, forgotten trails, anything to lose them." Tayani's dark gaze hardened. "The land speaks, even when men hide behind greed and greed alone," she said with solemn conviction. "If we listen, we might slip through the cracks they cannot find." Namid shifted painfully, each movement a staccato beat of his determination. "Now it falls upon me," he said, voice thick but resolute. "To protect you both." The weight of leadership settled upon his young shoulders, a mantle heavier than any wound. Clara looked at him, the fierce spark of emerging leadership flickering in his gaze. A stubborn flame defying the darkness that pressed from every side. Despite his pain, he bore himself with a gravity beyond his years. Not a boy anymore, but a son of chiefs, learning to wield courage as keenly as a blade. The forest itself seemed to pulse with silent anticipation, the ancient sentinel of oak and pine bearing witness to a struggle that transcended mere survival. Destiny wove its threads with every breath drawn beneath the moon's pale watch. Suddenly, harsh voices reverberated close. A surge of urgency, sharp as daggers cleaving the night. The rival faction was arriving faster than any of them hoped. Panic pricked at Clara's skin. Tayani hissed through clenched teeth. "They will not give us a moment's grace. Their hunger is fierce. They want to end this now." Namid leaned heavily on the steady strength of Tayani's arm as she helped him. "Forward through the shadows. Then we run, without hesitation, through the pass no one sees but those who know the land's secret scars." Clara's eyes found the narrow path Tayani spoke of, a sinister ribbon hidden by thorny oaks and shrouded in mist. This trail was perilous, marked by natural traps and steep drops. But no alternative remained. It was their one chance, their desperate gamble. A sudden sharp snap echoed close, a twig breaking beneath heavy boots. The hunters were almost upon them. "Move!" Clara's command cut the air, fierce and unyielding, a cry of life rising from the depths of her will. Now, together, flesh bruised and souls battered, they plunged into the secret trail, palms brushing damp bark, feet slipping on mossy stone as the forest swallowed their flight whole. Behind them, wild shouts and snarls pierced the night. The hunt was relentless, savage, unrelenting. Ahead, the mists thickened, the path winding dark and uncertain. And in that veiled wilderness, the test of survival became a crucible of loyalty, courage, and the fragile threads of trust they dared to spin. The drumbeats of suspicion echoed through the Apache village as Clara stepped cautiously over the sun-baked earth. Around her, the sturdy wooden lodges and woven canopies of the tribe formed a tableau both ancient and alive. Yet the life within them seemed shrouded in shadows, the wary glances of tribal leaders greeting her presence, the flicker of mistrust burning beneath each silent nod. The air hung heavy, with unspoken questions, thick as the dust stirred by restless feet. Namid, still limping lightly but standing taller than before, trailed closely behind Clara. His gaze swept the encampment with a guarded mixture of hope and defiance. The village he once called home now felt foreign, as though the walls he knew whispered warnings in a language he struggled to understand. Every elder's stare, every whispered word among the assembled warriors, tightened the grip of doubt around him. Tayani moved beside them, her stance firm, but her eyes softened as they flicked between Clara and Namid. She had promised to be their shield within these uncertain walls, to fight for the fragile trust forged beyond the trees. Yet even she could not quench the fires of suspicion that sparked among the council. The tribal leaders gathered swiftly in the central plaza, their voices low and measured as they debated the fate of the outsider who had dared to cross into their world. That brave woman who saved the chief's son from death itself. Some elders muttered of curses and broken boundaries, their eyes restless, searching Clara's face for deceit. Others whispered of gratitude, their voices trembling between relief and unease. Namid's heart pounded beneath his ragged cloak. A young man caught in the fierce crossfire of loyalty and skepticism. His leg pained him still, a pulsing reminder of the journey and the enemies that shadowed his every step. Yet within him stirred a growing resolve to claim his place, to stand firmly against the rivals who coveted his destiny as chief. Tayani stepped forward, voice unwavering as steel tempered by fire. "This woman," she said, eyes unwavering. "Her hands pulled Namid from death. Her spirit stands with ours, not against. She crossed the threshold alone, faced the wilderness and our enemies without faltering. She is not the stranger to be turned away, but an ally to be embraced." The murmur among the crowd rippled like wind through dry grass. Some faces softened briefly, others tightened further. The leader of the rival faction, a veteran warrior named Ahuli, darkened the circle with his presence. His eyes gleamed with cold calculation, and his words sliced through the tense air like a sharpened blade. "Trust is earned, not gifted," Ahuli said, his voice heavy with authority and disdain. "Namid's place as chief is not yet carved in stone. The strength of the tribe depends on a leader who commands respect, not one propped up by outsiders. This woman's intrusion threatens the delicate balance that holds us." Namid's jaw clenched, eyes flashing with equal parts pain and defiance. "You speak of balance, yet your actions sow discord," he replied with quiet fierceness. "The blood of this tribe flows through my veins, and my life was saved by Clara's courage. If you doubt that, then perhaps it is you who betrays our people's future." The assembled warriors shifted uneasily. The chasm between them widened visibly. The ancient tensions that had festered beneath years of rivalry flared, illuminated like dry tinder by the spark of this confrontation. Before the debate could escalate further, an overwhelming roar shattered the fragile reprieve. The sharp crack of arrows slicing air, war cries erupting like thunder across the compound. The rival faction's fighters had struck under the cover of chaos, their attack swift and merciless. Flames clawed hungrily at wooden huts, smoke spiraling thick and dark against the twilight sky. Men and women scrambled, weapons drawn, eyes wild with alarm and resolve. Clara's breath hitched, her gaze snapping to Namid and Tayani, their faces etched with urgency and fierce determination. The call to unite was instantaneous, old rivalries momentarily swallowed by the need for survival. Warriors who moments before had cast doubtful eyes at Clara now fought side by side with her, their blades flashing, their shouts piercing the smoky air. Clara's hand gripped a jagged stone, heart pounding with the rhythm of battle, as she moved swiftly to block a charging foe. Namid, wincing but steady, raised his spear with a strength born of necessity, protecting Clara even as the searing pain in his leg threatened to bring him down. Tayani's voice rang clear and commanding, rallying the scattered defenders, weaving through the chaos like a silver flame. The clash was brutal and unrelenting, a brutal dance where trust was forged in the heat of desperation. The rival faction's men pressed hard, but the village defenders held stubborn, their will as unyielding as the land beneath their feet. Amid the frenzy, Clara caught sight of a huli commanding from the edge of battle, a cruel smile etching his face. The fight was far from over. As the embers of burning wood drifted skyward, hearts hammered with the realization that survival demanded unity beyond old grudges. Trust, however fragile, had become the weapon they all must wield. The village rocked under the weight of the oncoming storm. The attack had forced every soul into the fire of necessity, compelling even the harshest skeptics to reconsider where their loyalties should rest. And in that crucible of violence and fear, the tribe stood poised on the precipice of change. The night air rang with clashing steel and desperate cries, as Clara and Namid fought side by side, forced into an alliance that would decide not only their fates, but the destiny of the Apache people. The rival faction's assault had shattered the fragile peace. A massacre loomed. Together, the tribe now had to stand or fall. The battle was upon them. The village thrummed with nervous energy as the Apache prepared for the storm looming on their horizon. Clara moved among the warriors, her steps deliberate and eyes sharp, feeling the weight of suspicion still tethered to her presence. Yet beneath the cold gazes, a grudging respect had begun to take root. Her courage and strategy had woven a fragile thread of trust in this fractured place. Namid stood by her side, his limp momentarily forgotten as he addressed the gathered defenders. His voice held a strength that belied his youth, commanding attention with every measured word. This was his moment, not just as the son of the chief, but as a leader striving to prove his worth against forces eager to see him fail. The encampment's fires flickered against the gathering dusk, casting long shadows that danced on weathered faces hardened by years of conflict. Clara set about organizing the defense, moving swiftly to marshal warriors and distribute weapons, every motion imbued with newfound authority. The warriors, once doubtful, responded with a surge of fierce energy, emboldened by her steady guidance. Tayani remained at Namid's side, her gaze scanning the perimeter with a warrior's vigilance. she whispered counsel, reminding both Clara and Namid of the terrain's secrets and the spirits that watched over their people. The boy turned leader, soaked in the wisdom, every word a stepping stone toward the mantle he was destined to claim. Amid the preparations, a tension simmered beneath the surface, a quiet, insidious fear gnawing at the tribe's resolve. Clara noticed the guarded glances exchanged between some of the elders, the subtle signs of fractured loyalties lurking in the shadows. The threat wasn't simply the rival faction outside the village gates. It was the enemy within. As twilight surrendered to night, the drums of war began to beat, low and steady. The air crackled with anticipation, woven with the scent of smoke and the metallic tang of sharpened steel. The defenders took their positions, each breath heavy with determination and the knowledge that the coming battle would test the very soul of their people. Namid's eyes met Clara's briefly, a silent pact passing between them, one forged in blood and perseverance. The young leader's gaze then hardened as whispers reached their ears, words carried on the wind that chilled even the most stalwart hearts. A shadow moved among the loyalists, a figure once trusted, now cloaked in betrayal. "There's a traitor in our midst." Teani's voice was barely a whisper, yet it struck like a thunderclap in the stillness. Someone close to Namid, feeding the enemy's plans. The revelation rippled through their ranks like wildfire. Faces paled, breaths caught, and uncertainty fractured the fragile unity painstakingly built. Clara's heart pounded, every muscle coiled tight as the weight of this betrayal settled upon them. The battle would not only be fought at the fringes of the village, but deep within, the very core of trust challenged by treachery. Namid clenched his fists, the pain in his leg dimming beneath the fire ignited in his eyes. "We face the enemy without and the serpent within," he declared, voice ringing with fierce resolve. "But we do not falter. We stand together." The night deepened, a horizon alive with the faint glow of torches advancing through the darkness. The clash was imminent. Steel would meet steel. Blood would stain the earth, and the fate of the tribe hung balanced on a knife's edge. Within the flickering shadows, eyes narrowed. With suspicion and resolve, the final confrontation loomed. And before the battle's first cry, the chilling truth lingered like a silent specter. The traitor's hand was already weaving ruin within their walls. The village was set ablaze under the darkening sky as the rival faction's ruthless assault tore through the Apache land. Flames licked hungrily at the wooden lodges, smoke billowing thick and choking the dusky air. The clash had come with ferocity, and every soul within the encampment felt the weight of war pressing down on their shoulders. Clara moved like a quiet storm through the chaos, her breath sharp and focused. Her hand gripped a jagged stone, a makeshift weapon in the fury of battle. Around her, the tribal warriors fought, with savage determination, steel flashing and shouts piercing the smoky veil. Despite her injuries and fatigue, Clara held tightly to the purpose that had carried her since the moment she plunged her hands into the quicksand for Namid's life. This fight was for more than territory or pride. It was for the survival of a future in which old wounds might finally heal. Namid, though limp slowed his steps, bore himself like a born leader beneath the fire of attack. Spear in hand, he deflected blows and shielded Clara with fierce resolve, his dark eyes blazing beneath the grit and blood streaked across his face. Every movement carried the heavy burden of lineage and destiny, yet his determination never faltered. Here, amidst cries of pain and rage, he became more than the chief's son. He embodied hope. Tayani was everywhere at once, commanding, defending, small but resolute against the storm of enemies. Her voice cut sharply through the roar of battle, rallying friends, orchestrating defenses with a warrior's precision. The fire in her grew brighter as she fought not just for survival, but to protect the fragile bond forged among them all. Amidst the whirlwind of combat, Clara's gaze locked onto the figure of Ahuli, the rival faction leader, commanding cold and cruel from the outskirts of the fray. His eyes held nothing but ambition and disdain, the dark heart of the threat that had cast its shadow over the tribe for too long. He sneered as his men pressed forward, his calculated fury threatening to swallow all hope. Then, through the crush of voices and clashing blades, a sudden cry rang out, the sharp betrayal of treachery. Tayani's voice sliced through the chaos. The traitor reveals himself! Faces turned, weapons paused, eyes narrowing toward a shadow slipping desperately close to Namid's flank. Clara's heart clenched. The serpent within their walls moved with deadly intent. But Namid, quick despite his pain, spun and locked gazes with the betrayer, a trusted warrior, twisted by greed and fear. Their exchange crackled with tension, the years of loyalty broken in a moment of darkest choice. With a swift movement born of hard-earned skill, Clara struck, disarming the traitor before deadly harm could befall Namid. The crowd roared as the would-be assassin fell, the danger inside exposed and defeated. Trust, fractured but not broken, held its fragile ground. The battle surged as one, a united front of tribe and steadfast allies breaking the rival faction's assault. The dark presence of Ahuli faltered as his men fell back beneath the unyielding will of the defenders. Namid, despite his injury, rallied his people with a voice steady and strong, tempering fear with courage. Slowly, the tide turned. When the dust settled, the village stood scarred but unbroken. Fires smoldered low, ashes mingling with the dirt, a harsh reminder of what had been lost and what had been spared. A weary silence fell, pierced only by ragged breaths and shared mourning. Clara limped beside Namid and Tayani as the survivors gathered beneath the waning moonlight. The weight of battle hung in their eyes, yet a new resolve glimmered faintly beneath the exhaustion. The promise of a dawn born from sacrifice. The tribal elders, once divided and skeptical, now looked upon Clara with quiet reverence. Her deeds had transcended the boundaries that mistrust had forged. When the council spoke, their voices held deference and welcome. Clara, an elder intoned, voice grave but warm. You cross the threshold between worlds with courage true and heart bare. In saving Namid, you saved us all. The tribe accepts you, not as stranger or outsider, but as ally and friend. Namid met Clara's eyes, the pain in his legs softened by a rare and genuine smile. This is more than acceptance, he said softly. It is a new beginning. Tayani placed a steady hand on Clara's shoulder, her fierce gaze shining now with hope rather than doubt. Together, we stand stronger. The path ahead is long, but the bonds we forged in fire will carry us forward. Clara surveyed the village, breathing in the quiet strength of a people bound by history and heart. The land around them was rugged and unyielding, but so too was the spirit now rekindled in their midst. The rival faction was defeated, the traitor cast out, and at last a fragile peace settled over the Apache homeland. Clara's eyes drifted to the horizon, where first light began to sift pale fingers through the trees. The dawn carried a promise of healing, of unity, of a future where the old conflicts might fade beneath the light of understanding. She knew the road ahead would still hold trials and shadows, but for that moment, the air was clear, and the impossible seemed within reach. Together, Clara, Namid, and Tayani stood, bound not just by survival, but by trust earned in the deepest crucible of all. In the heart of the wild frontier, a fierce woman's courage had changed the tide of fate, and as the sun rose over the scarred but steadfast land, the voices of the Apache tribe echoed louder than ever, a song of hope, unity, and a future reclaimed. The story was ended, but the legend would live on.